Hello, hello. All you online, I didn't have my mic on, so we're going to be in Genesis chapter 30 tonight. We're starting. You turn it down just slightly. And we're going to start in chapter 29, verse 31. And the title of our teaching tonight is Wife, Strife, and Family Life. See you, Syria. Marco. Good, brother. So if you remember way back when we started chapter 12, we're looking from chapter 12 to chapter 50. There's four people that are highlighted in these chapters. And you see it there in your handout. Abraham, and his life was highlighted between chapter 12 and chapter 25. And then, of course, Isaac. For as important as he is, he only gets 2 chapters. But from 25 verse 12 to 26 verse 35, we see about his life. And then, of course, Jacob here that we're looking at now, we're kind of in the middle of his story. And here in chapter 30, and he goes all the way to chapter 36. And then the final fourth person is Joseph. So when we think about the nation of Israel, the first 3, of course, are the patriarchs that founded, from the blessing, the calling, to the passing down to descendants, to the creating of the foundation of the children of Israel. And then Joseph, he's included in that list because he preserves the nation. And God uses him at a time when, he moves the children of Israel to Egypt, which holds them, takes care of them, and then preserves the nation. So he's got a real part, and it's going to be neat when we get to Joseph's life because he is like Jesus. He's a type of Jesus, and we get to compare his life with the life of Jesus Christ. So, and just as a reminder, in Genesis, no, that's okay. I don't have that verse I'm thinking about, but. Anyway, I'll just mention it. The blessings that came to Abraham in chapter 12, verse 3. There's 2 things. He says there, I'll bless those who bless you, and then I will curse him who curses you. God told him in chapter 12, verse 3. So as we're going through this story of the Hebrew race here and looking at how God views it, how God sees it, it's important for us. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go through this was to really have a good sense of the role of Israel in the last days and the division of the church in Israel. And it's really important. And I put this verse in here. I meant to have it on the slides, but I forgot it. Because there's 2 words there for curse. I don't know if you remember the first word where he says, I will curse. God uses the word ara, which means I'm going to curse you. I'm going to impose a barrier in your life But the other word, when he says him who curses you, he uses another word, and it's the word kala. And it's a word that means to treat lightly. So we think of cursing like, but it's also what God is saying to Abraham here is if people treat you lightly, disregard you, have contempt for you. This is what we're seeing in the world today, especially in America. And I was thinking about this because it seems as though Trump is getting on board that train. I don't know if you've seen the last couple of days. And it concerns me because what God promises Abraham is, I will personally bring a curse. This is God's personal curse. He'll bring opposition to the people that oppose his people. And even if it's just treating them with contempt or treating them, disregarding them. So it's a really interesting word there. We don't have to outright, although that's included, but just having they don't matter, because what we're seeing in this study is that they matter to God, and he has a plan for them still. Okay, if we make it to the end of the teaching tonight, we'll look at some of those things that God's going to do in the future. Well, this we know from Genesis 28, verse 14, that was passed on to Jacob there. If you remember there, also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth, and shall spread abroad to the west and the east and the north and the south. And in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So we're gonna, oh, sorry about that. I thought it was off. There it is. So as we go through this chapter tonight, we're going to see the birth of Jacob's 12 sons and just kind of look at how that comes about. And it comes about as we go through here with a lot of strife and fighting and envy and, between Leah and Rachel. And they're bringing their maids into it and all this stuff. And the kids are being born, and God is blessing the children because of this promise, okay? And it's good for us because what it shows us is that the Lord works in spite of human interference or human effort. We can't thwart his plan, okay? His will never changes. And we think, oh, we missed that situation, or this happened or that happened. And God's yeah, it may have happened, but it hasn't deterred me from my goal. And so, again, we've seen all through here, haven't we? Because one of the arguments against the nation of Israel today is that they're all non-believers. And so God's cut them off for their disobedience. But we haven't seen a chapter yet where they've been obedient, okay? So we need to keep this in mind. They didn't start obedient, and they never became obedient, okay? So they're going to get obedient, and that's going to happen in the tribulation period. That's what the tribulation period is for, is to cause Israel to finally submit to God. And so we can't use it as a reason to curse them, and in essence. We can't use it as a reason to slight them. And so we've got to be really careful with that, because here's the promises of God. And we know when he spoke to Abraham, he said it was an eternal covenant. When he spoke to Isaac, he told him it's an eternal covenant. And when he spoke to Jacob, he told him, you get the same covenant, that eternal covenant that I promised your father. And so he has not broken that word. Eternal means eternal, right? And so we can't replace that. When the church was formed, a lot of the belief is that the church replaced Israel. There's no replacing. In the Bible, guess what the church, when the word church is used in the Bible, guess what it means? The church. Guess what Israel means in the Bible? Israel. They're two separate entities, okay? Now, a lot of people complain that or they'll use it as an argument, well, then you can't have two methods of salvation. We don't. Jews can get saved today. Jews can come to Christ. In fact, the whole first church was Jewish people, right? It wasn't until Acts chapter 8 that they actually began to talk to Gentiles, and that happened because Saul started persecuting them, and they ran up to Samaria, and Philip started preaching, and Gentiles got saved, right? So that was God's intention the whole time, was that this would expand beyond a Jewish church into a Gentile worldwide church. And so, but always the identity of the church is the church. The identity of Israel is always Israel. And if we keep that in mind as we read the Bible, we'll see it. And we'll say, oh, the story makes sense when you put everything in its place and you don't try to change it. Well, let's dig into the study here. We go to chapter 29, verse 31. I know Charles went over this last week, but let's just take the whole picture here tonight. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And so we see right at the outset, God is involved in both wives' lives, okay? Leah, she's unloved, but she's fruitful. Rachel is loved but unfruitful, okay? And so Rachel had the heart of Jacob, and Leah longed for her husband to love her. And so, but God's in the middle of it, okay? God sees it, he knows it. He sometimes you wonder, Lord, are you even there? Are you aware of my situation? God is aware, okay? And so it starts here opening up with the Lord saw. Here's what was happening in their lives. Here's what was happening in their family. So her womb was open, and she has her first son, Reuben. Notice there in verse 32, so Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. And for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction, and now therefore my husband will love me. Notice her heart. finally, I'm giving my husband something, an heir for him, and now he's going to love me for this. Now there's a reason to love me. You guys remember what happened? Charles went over it last week, where he was surprised when he woke up in the morning and it was Leah in the tent, and not the wife that he thought he worked for or agreed to for 7 years. And Laban tricked him. But isn't it interesting that the deceiver, Jacob, who deceived his father, ends up getting deceived, right? And so this is how God, almost like, I'm going to judge you the way you judge. I'm going to do to you what you do, right? To help you grow. And so he got surprised. So he didn't have an attraction to her. He didn't have a affection for her, but here he was, his wife. And so she's longing for him to finally love her. And she says, finally, here's a reason. My sister's barren. She's unable to have children. Finally, there's a reason for Jacob to love me. And so, one of the things about childbearing in the Near East in this time, it was very, very important that, the women had children. We see Hannah crying out in 1 Samuel. And she's so brokenhearted, and her husband, so loving, he's like, you're better than 10 children to me, Hannah. But she just was like, Lord, and remember she went to the tabernacle and she couldn't even get the words out. And Eli came and said, hey, the Lord's heard your prayer and he's going to answer your prayer. And the Lord was trying to get her to the place where she would offer her son up for God's use. And then that's how we got the prophet Samuel. So God hears and God knows and God understands. So we see Reuben here being born. He's the firstborn now. His name means behold a son. And so God here demonstrates his care for Leah. So she doesn't have the love of her husband, but she has the love of the Father. She has the love of God in her life. And I think she's awakening here to the reality of that. Now, they're 14 years into their marriage, right? We're going to see at the end of this chapter where he's been working now for Laban for 14 years. Remember, he worked the first 7 years to get Rachel, got surprised. And so he said, well, work for me another 7 years and I'll give you Rachel when the week is over. So he had two marriage weeks in a row, and then he worked another 7 years. Now he's at the end of the second 7 years. And so they've been married for 14 years, and now they have a son. And so we see here, what's interesting about Reuben, if we jump to the end of Genesis and we see Jacob blessing his sons, this is what he said about Reuben. Reuben, you're my firstborn, my might, in the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power, unstable as water, you shall not succeed, or you shall not excel. So he gives when Jacob is dying and he starts to lay his hands on his sons, he gets a word from the Lord for them. And this was a prophetic word that God gave him. And so as the firstborn, we saw this in the life of Esau, the firstborn was to get the double blessing, right? And because Reuben, he later on, we're going to see it, he goes and ends up having sex with Bilhah, Leah's maid, or it was Rachel's maid, and he defiles her, And Jacob finds out about it. Jacob knows about it. And so at the end of his life, he goes, listen, you're not going to be the double portion. You're unstable. And it's going to go to your brother. It actually goes to Joseph. And through Joseph, it goes to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And so here, it's interesting when you look at these prophecies, because Reuben ended up, being in that place where he couldn't, where he should have been ruling, he should have been leading the family, but because of his flesh and his inability to be present and usable to his father, he ended up getting a lesser blessing in his life. But so what happens is the blessings end up going to his other brothers, right? To Levi and to Judah. And of course, in Levi, we have the priesthood, and in Judah, we have the kings. And so even though Judah's not the firstborn, he's the one that the kingly line comes through, that eventually Jesus will come through. Then she has another son here in verse 33, Simeon. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon, and his name means heard. So Leah here is recognizing now God is the one who has heard her cries and underscoring her deepening faith. And so the longing of her heart, again, is to be loved. But she's beginning to acknowledge God is hearing my prayer. And this is very encouraging to her. She begins to grow closer. Then she has another son, Levi, here in verse 34. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi, which means joined to or attached. So again, she's like keeping score here. Man, I'm abundantly now providing for him, and wow, God's blessing me. And this is fueling the envy now with Rachel. She's the older sister, Rachel's the younger sister, and but she's longing as she's having these sons for a greater closeness in her marriage, and but she has this sign that God's working in her. And so that's giving her some confidence. That's giving her some hope in her life. In fact, at the end of Jacob's life, he prophesies over Simeon and Levi together. He says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. We're going to see chapter 34 with the story of Dinah, that they go and they basically kill all the men in Shechem. Yeah. Chapter 34 is going to be the Dinah chapter. Not a great story, but so these brothers were not only by blood but also in disposition. They have the same nature. They're bloody, and yet through Levi comes the priesthood. It's really an incredible thing. And you remember how that came about when Moses came down the mountain with the 10 Commandments, and he said, "Who's on God's side?" And only the tribe of Levi, because he was from the tribe of Levi, him and Aaron, and they all ran to him, and so they became the priests. What was God's original plan with the 12 tribes? They were to be a nation of priests. All of the tribes were to be priests. That was God's original plan. But because that day with the 10 Commandments, and only Levi came to God's side, he said, only Levi is going to be my priest. So think about that. The whole nation would have been priests, standing in the gap between God and men. Now, this is a place where the church now has become that. We're priests, standing in the gap for the world, right? We have a relationship with God, and we're able to represent Him before the world, and so that is a place where God is using the church in that way. But eventually, He's going to use it directly in the life of Israel. And then she has Judah in verse 35, and she conceived and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Notice what she says here. She doesn't mention her husband. She says, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore, she called his name Judah, and then she stopped bearing. Notice the progression here. Longing for her husband, has a son. He's going to love me, doesn't love her. Has another son. Oh, he's going to finally love me, doesn't love her. Oh, give him a third son. Now there's reason to love me. He doesn't love her. And she finally has her fourth son, and she goes, it's God. It's God. And this is Judah. And Judah is of course, the tribe that we get Jesus from. Look what Jacob prophesies over him in Genesis 49. Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh is a name for the Messiah. And to him shall be the obedience of the people. So we see Judah as the nation of Israel comes into the promised land, in the land of Canaan. We see Judah takes a leadership role, right? You remember when in Judges chapter I believe it's 6, where remember there were still all the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Girgashites and all of the ites that were in the land. And Joshua was like, why haven't you gone to get them, And so they began to seek the Lord. And what they asked was, which tribe goes up first? And God said, the tribe of Judah is going to go up, and he's going to lead the nation. And so they became the leaders of the nation. And this is where David comes through the line of Judah. Jesus comes through the tribe of Judah. And so this is all moving now. We see again the promised seed working through. Who does he come through? He comes through an unloved wife. Look where Jesus comes. This is what's so amazing about Jesus. He comes to the brokenhearted. He comes to those. And here's God. God is using an unloved wife, where he finally has her heart now on her 4th son. And she goes, it's praise. This is going to be the focus of my life from now on. She's not perfect, because she's still going to fight her sister. But, Judah, his symbol was a lion. And this is why we call Jesus, one of his names is the Lion of the tribe of Judah, right? And because the lion was the figurehead of the tribe, and he was the leader over the other tribes. I like this quote from Arnold Fruchtenbaum. In naming her first 3 sons, Leah expressed a simple hope that Jacob would learn to love her, or at least treat her equally. That never happened. By the time she came to her 4th son, she focused on God rather than on Jacob, realizing that although Jacob did not love her, God did. And the 2 key institutions of Israel, the priesthood through Levi and the royalty through Judah, came from an unplanned and unwanted marriage. And because God is in the business of redeeming, he redeems everyone's story, right? We always gauge ourselves against each other, and I'm not as popular, I'm not as good looking, I'm not as rich, I'm not as smart, whatever. We're always weighing our value oftentimes off other people or who we're around. But God comes and he just redeems our story. He's redeeming Leah's story here. And I just want to show you something here. What's interesting is Jacob never loved her, did he? But look what he does at the end of his life. I just want to point this out. Jacob instructed his sons, soon I will die and join my ancestors. Bury me with my father and grandfather in the cave of the field of Ephron, the Hittite. This is the cave of the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan that Abraham bought from Ephraim the Hittite as a permanent burial site. There Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried. And there I buried Leah. Yeah. So what does he say at the very end? Bury me with Leah. Remember where Rachel got buried? There by Bethlehem and Ephrathah. And he says at the end of his life, bury me with Leah. So at some point in his life, he came to be affectionate towards her, right? And then he gets buried with her. This is a redemption story. How God, just provided to the one that was unloved, and that's how verse 29 opened up. God knew that Leah was unloved, and these are the things that move the heart of God. Sometimes we don't think about God from the sense of compassion, but He's full of compassion, right? When we see Jesus, the one emotion that is spoken about Jesus more than any other was his compassion, right? He gets off the boat and he sees the people, and it says he's moved with compassion and he feeds them, right? And that's where he does the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And what Jesus is doing is revealing the Father to us. This is always the heart of God. And what's beautiful is we can come to him through all these situations in our lives, even if we are unloved and even if we are alone. God's like, you're not alone, and I see you, and that's encouraging for us, isn't it? Then we go to chapter 30 now, beginning in verse 1. Now here comes Jacob and Bilhah's 2 sons now. And so now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. Rachel is now longing and feeling incomplete because she hasn't been able to have children. And this is a real burden on a lot of women, even to today. And so she's, having a pain of childlessness in her marriage. She's longing for the blessing of children. She desires it. Remember, she already has her husband's heart. She's not wanting children to win her husband over. She has her husband already. He loves her. And so that part of her life is secure, but this other part, there's a longing in her heart for this to be met, you know. And her reaction to her barrenness is anger, isn't it? It's despair. I'm hopeless. She's grabbing a hold of her husband. Give me children or I'm going to die. And we see the heartache that comes from that, right? And this is good too, because the Lord is wanting her to have children. And he's going to give her children. He's going to give her 2 sons. But he's waiting for the timing, the perfect timing to give them to her. And so, you know, in these situations, we have to trust God. You know, this happened in our life. I shared this before, I'm sure. But my daughter was unable to get pregnant. She was married for 5 years. She was longing to get pregnant. She was longing to have a baby. She was trying everything, fertility treatments and all kinds of stuff. And she was just having a really hard time. They even went so far as adopting snowflake babies. They drove to Tennessee and they adopted 6 snowflake babies. And they implanted 3 in her and they failed, and they went back and they got the other 3 that they adopted and they failed. And so in essence, she had, 6 miscarriages in that thing. So it was heartbreaking for her. And I remember one day I'm reading in Isaiah 54:1, and it said, the barren woman shall be more fruitful than the married woman. And the Lord spoke to me. He said, that's for Maddie, call her. And so I'm all excited. God spoke to me. And I called her up and I said, Maddie, you're going to have a baby. And she was like, thanks, Dad. Her fertility treatment just failed like that week. And here I am like, woo, babe, you're going to have a baby, you know. She couldn't receive it. She couldn't believe it. And me and my wife, we held on to that for 3 years. Was it any? 3 years, that word. And then in 2020, Thanksgiving 2020, she said, you're going to be grandparents, you know. And so God gave her her own baby, and now she has her 3rd son. And so when the Lord healed her, he really healed her, you know. But it's interesting because God can speak something and God can show you something, but it's not always the timing for the person to receive it, right? And this is where Rachel is. She's having a hard time receiving it. Like, will God do it? I'm just losing hope. I've got to the point where I don't think it's ever going to happen. But notice Jacob here, he gets angry at her in verse 2. Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who's withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Here's the tension in the family. You know, it's apparent. And yet Jacob is saying, listen, this is in God's hands. You know, they didn't have any medical treatments or fertility treatments. They had some aphrodisiacs that we'll see in the story, but everything was God. It's God's blessing or not God's blessing. And of course, God is in charge of all of that in our lives. And sometimes, he has us bear a burden of barrenness, and sometimes he allows us to be fruitful. But it's all for his purposes in our life, isn't it? And so he couldn't solve her problem. As much as he loved her, he had no ability to solve her problem. And so what does she do? Notice in verse 3, she said, here's my maid Bilhah, go into her, and she'll bear a child on my knees, and I also may have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as a wife, and Jacob went into her. So they're going to use a surrogate here. They're going to use her maid that was given to her at her wedding. If you remember, Laban gave her Bilhah. He gave Leah Zilpah, and they were their maids to take care of them and help them. And now she's saying, marry my maid now and have a baby by her. Now, this is the normal custom in this culture, okay? In the law of Hammurabi, as we looked at before several weeks ago, this was the common law. There was laws in there. So this is the law that over this whole region, the pagans and the Gentiles would have followed. This was the set law. So this is the custom of the culture. That if you were barren as a woman and you had a servant, that servant could have a baby on your behalf. And so the language here of bearing a child on my knees is that sense of that child becomes hers, you as the over your servant. And so she gave Bilhah her maid as a wife, and Jacob went into her in verse 4. And so she's in her despair here. She wants to help God, right? And we see here the Rachel's despair led her to offer Bilhah to Jacob And verse 3 describes the offer that she might bear upon my knees, meaning Rachel would be the legal mother. And this was in keeping with the code of Hammurabi. And for that reason, it was Rachel, not Bilhah, who named the children. So the mother named the children when they were born, and this is why Rachel's going to name this child, even though Bilhah bears this child and gives birth to him. And because Bilhah was Rachel's handmaid, Rachel would be the legal mother and obtain children by her. Literally, I may be builded by her is how the Hebrew is written. I will be builded by her. So in essence, Rachel is adopting this child as her own, and in the culture, this counts as her own child. And so notice here, Rachel names him. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son here in verse 5. And Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she called his name Dan. And Dan means a judge. And so God has judged my case. And so she's here saying now, God did something my husband couldn't do, I couldn't do, nobody could do. And God approved my plan, right? Sometimes God will allow a plan to work, and he'll say, I'm not approving your plan, but I'm going to use your plan, right? Now, this happened before, didn't it? Sarah, who couldn't get pregnant, who was trying to help God, told Abraham, go take my servant Hagar, have a son by her. And he did. And what do we have today? We have this mess in the world because of the Ishmaelites and the Israelites, So it's interesting. Not every plan works out, and not every plan is approved by God, but still God blesses the children. In every situation, the child is always the blessing. And even children that are conceived in terrible situations, the child is the blessing. And so we never want to punish the child for what the parents do, right? So here she names him judge. When we go and look at what Jacob says and prophesies over him, Dan shall judge his people, and as one of the tribes of Israel, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider shall fall backwards. So this prophecy partially came true. Do you guys know where? Probably not. Judges, in the life of Samson, when Samson was a judge over Israel, it was the tribe of Dan that came out during Samson's judgeship there and brought the victory. So that whole story revolves around the tribe of Dan, and so it was partially fulfilled in that time of this prophecy. Now, what we're going to see as we go along, some of these prophecies won't be fulfilled or fully fulfilled until the millennial reign of Christ, when Israel gets their entire inheritance. So notice verse 7, Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali, which means wrestling. So we see here, what's Rachel's heart? Finally, I'm getting over on my sister, The sibling rivalry here is you just get a picture of it. It had to be, I think the way it was set up was Jacob had his own tent and they had their own tents, It's like, I need a break from you guys, That would be a hard household to live in, with the constant fighting and constant envy and constant strife, right? So now her maid Bilhah has produced two children. And again, what do we see in these fruitful children is the promise of God is being fulfilled. The promise of God expanding Jacob is being fulfilled. Now, how it's happening, again, how did Jacob get the blessing from Isaac? It was through deceit. It was through scheming, right? But God still honored it. That was God's original plan. It didn't thwart God's plan. That was his plan. People tried to thwart it, but he couldn't. So the same thing here. It's coming through these situations, but still God is blessing and God is working. So when Jacob blesses Naphtali at the end of his life, he says, Naphtali's a deer let loose, and he does beautiful words. He uses beautiful words. And so he was a poetry and music. And this is where Naphtali was the tribe where Deborah and Barak got the victory. And one of the things we see from Judges chapter 5 is the Song of Deborah. She comes from the tribe of Naphtali. And so we see kind of some of these things that Jacob prophesied over them coming true in their life and how they're being expressed through those things. Well, here's the other maid here, beginning in verse 9. While Leah saw she had stopped bearing, so remember she had 4 sons, and then it just didn't seem like she was going to get pregnant again. So now she takes Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. And then Leah said, "A troop comes." And she called his name. The literal is a troop of fortune, but it's also fortune or luck or opportunity. But it's tied around a troop that is seeking for a fortune. But it's actually a hard word. There's a lot of words in the Hebrew that you can use to write treasure or felicity or value or whatever the fortune. But she uses a word that's a painful word, like you have to work for it and work for it and work for it. And this is the word she chose here to call him a fortune. That's what the name Gad sounded like. Here was what was prophesied over Gad: a troop shall tramp upon him, but he shall triumph at last. So like Dan here, Gad would also be effective in battle. Do you remember where Gad settled in the promised land? On the eastern side. You remember that? The half tribe of Manasseh, the tribe of Gad, and the tribe of Reuben. They all were over there, and they were like, we don't want to go in. We like the pasture land here. Let's all stay here. And remember, Moses was like, you need to come in and fight for your brothers, right? And God allowed them to stay over there. But because they weren't in the land, they always fought. They were the first the raiders would come down, the invaders would come down, and they would confront the tribe of Gad. And this was prophesied by Jacob, and it came true in their life because they were exposed over there on the other side of the Jordan River. And all the marauding enemies would come and he had to defend himself. He had to, be always quick in fighting. And then we see Asher in verse 12, and Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. And then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. And she called his name Happy. His name is Asher. It means happy. So notice the names are given by really from the heart, aren't they? They really express what the person is feeling and going through at the time. And names him Asher because she's just so happy that she's involved in the expansion of the life of Jacob and the promise of God. When we look at what Jacob prophesies over him, notice bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties. The part of the land that he got as his inheritance was the lowlands of Carmel, literally the vineyard area of Israel. So he was extremely fruitful. And he, was along the Mediterranean Sea, and it's some of the most fertile land there in Israel even to today. And this was the land of Asher. And so again, this prophetic word from the Father, it's really an amazing thing that we see in the Bible, that he speaks into their life, and it's from the Lord, and it's a encouragement or it's a reality, right, for their lives. And so we see him doing that. Now in verse 14, we see Jacob and Leah's 3 children now. So remember, she thought she couldn't have any more kids, and she's now going to have 3 more kids. Verse 14, then Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And then Rachel said to Leah, give me some of your son's mandrakes. Verse 15, and she said to her, is it a small matter that you would take away my son's mandrakes also? Notice what she says there. I'll reread that, verse 15. She said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you also take away my son's mandrakes?" And Rachel said, "Therefore he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." She basically, they're bargaining who he's going to sleep with that night. This is why you don't want two wives, okay? This would just be a good reason why you don't want two wives. So she's basically buying the night with Jacob by giving Rachel the mandrakes, okay? And in verse 16, when Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come into me, for I've surely hired you for my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. So again, here's the mandrake. I'll show you in a minute. So remember, these guys are up in Haran. They're up here. They're still up in living with Laban and watching over Laban's flocks, and so they're way up there. They're not in the land of Canaan right now. So when you see the mandrakes here, what are mandrakes? The Hebrew word is love apples, and it's a low-growing plant. You can see it there on the right there. Kind of grows at the ground level, but it gives off purple flowers that are very fragrant. Has a sweet, distinctive fragrance. It's a member of the potato family because it's a root. And so it's a nightshade. It's poison. All parts of it are poison. They use it as medicine today, even in the Middle East, for infertility. And they'll use it to help barren women conceive. The Arab communities use it even to today. It's actually mentioned, if you notice what the roots look like a man. And that's, part of it. I don't know if it's like, ancient whatever, but it seems as though, notice this in Song of Solomon, it's only mentioned here and in Song of Solomon 7:13. The mandrakes give off a fragrance, and that at our gate of pleasant fruits, all manner new and old, which I have laid up for you, my beloved. This is Solomon and his wife. And if you remember in Song of Solomon, chapter 7, she says, let's go out to the vineyards and let's go have sex outside. Song of Solomon is just a sex manual. That's all it is, okay? And God is showing this was my heart for the sexual relationship in marriage. And it's like the mandrakes have blossomed, and the fragrance is, because they believe that it brought fertility and it brought conception. And so it's listed here in a romantic way in Song of Solomon. It's here in Genesis 30 as a very practical way. Leah's like, I need those because I need to get pregnant again. And Rachel's like, leave him with me because I need to get pregnant. That's the whole goal. So we see here that this was kind of the beliefs and the culture and the things that in the culture they're living in. So notice verse 17, God listened to Leah. She conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. And Leah said, God has given me my wages because I have given my maid to my husband. And so she called his name Recompense. So Issachar means recompense. God's paid me now because I gave up what I wanted. He's heard my cry and he's given me he's paid me now for that. Notice she didn't take the mandrakes, did she? She didn't use the mandrakes. She gave them to her sister. So she doesn't get pregnant by the culture's aphrodisiac or medicine or whatever. She gets pregnant by God. And it's the Lord who opens her womb again. And this is, again, after she thought, I'm barren now. I'm done having children. And this is just a beautiful thing. Again, God is listening. God is paying attention. And why? What did I do? Oh. Look how Jacob blessed Issachar. Issachar is a strong donkey lying down between two burdens. He saw that rest was good and that the land was pleasant. He bowed his shoulder to bear the burden and became a band of slaves. So we see here that he chooses an agricultural way of life and produce rather than being a part of the political system or the kings or anybody else. And he, just became basically a tiller of the field, this group of people, this tribe. So look at the 10th child now coming in, verse 19. And Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me because I've borne him six sons. And she called his name Zebulun. Zebulun means exalted. Notice again, her heart's longing to dwell with her husband. And she's lonely still. And here she's acknowledging God has endowed me with good endowment. And it's basically, that idea, he's exalting me. And now, hopefully, I'll be able to, again, my husband will exalt me. I hope he will raise me up, right? And so this is her sixth son she's given to him now. She's provided half of Jacob's 12 children, 12 sons. He has more daughters, but only one daughter is listed in the story. So look what Jacob prophesies over him in the end. Zebulun shall dwell by the haven of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall adjoin Sidon. If you've been watching the news, Sidon is in the news because Israel's been bombing them. It's in Lebanon. And Zebulun they became people that move things with ships. They're on the Mediterranean Sea. What's interesting is when in the millennial reign, the Bible tells us they're going to go from the Mediterranean Sea to their present area. They're going to expand in the millennial reign. And so again, some of these promises and some of these prophecies are still in front of us, right? They're still coming for us. We're going to see them with our own eyes. Right now we're reading from history, but we're going to see them with our own eyes during the millennial reign. Okay, when Jesus is in Jerusalem, sitting on the throne of God, sitting on the throne of David, and he's ruling the earth from Israel, we're going to see the fulfillment of all God's promises in chapter 12, verse 1 through 3. And it's going to be an incredible thing to see, right? And we can't wait for that to happen. And then in verse 21, we see, afterwards she bore a daughter and called her Dinah, which means judgment. There's not a lot spoken about her in this chapter. Remember what Moses does? He'll be telling the story and then he'll suddenly just introduce somebody. And the reason he's doing that is all of chapter 34 is about her. And it's going to explain some things to us. Again, he's given us background information. What's happening with the nation of Israel? How did they get here? Why are they there? Why are they in Egypt? These are things we only get from the book of Genesis. And so we're going to see how that works out in Dinah's life and the rest of Jacob's sons. Finally, now look in verse 22, what happens? Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. Isn't this beautiful? All of these years are going by, 14 years now. Rachel's longing to have a child. And it says here, God remembered her. Now, when the Bible says God remembered her, what's he saying to us when Moses tells us God remembered? It's time for God to move in her life. Okay, so this same language was given when Noah was in the ark, right? And then you get to chapter 7, it says, "And God remembered Noah." In the English, we're like, "Oh no, he forgot about him. That's why he was in the ark so long." No, it was time. And this is what's happening in Rachel's life. It's time now for Joseph to be born. And God is going to do some amazing things through Joseph. Notice verse 23, and she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. This is so valuable to her that she immediately says, I'm going to have more. I'm going to have more. But notice here, she says God, she uses the name Elohim here, the mighty God, the creator God, the powerful God. And then she uses the word Yahweh, the Lord. Yahweh, he's the covenant-keeping God. And so he has the power to bring conception, and he has the love to hold on to his covenant and the ability to hold on to his covenant. And so she names Joseph, which means Yahweh has added it, and literally it's this, he add. So she basically says God's added to me. He's given him to me. And this is beautiful because she's finally having that longing of her heart met. And it's beautiful because it just says God remembered her. And this whole time, God's been holding out for her, and giving her the love of her husband as a placeholder in her life until he was going to fulfill the desire of her heart. God is so right on time because Joseph had to be born at a time where he was going to be enabled to help the nation of Israel, where he was going to be able to help all of Jacob's sons to get out of Canaan and come to Egypt. And from there, because remember what God told Abraham, your descendants are going to be in a foreign land for 400 years until the sins of the Amalekites are complete. And so this is again, God working in the circumstances. And this is one of the things where we're looking at what's happening today in our culture. God is working in the circumstances. And we see people make decisions and we go, why is he making that decision? That's an odd decision. That shouldn't be the decision he makes, right? And we get frustrated as people, but God's like, I'm moving the parts on the chessboard. And I'm using him, and I'm using him, and I'm using him, and I'm using him. And things are moving into place because just at the right time, Jesus is going to come back. And this is what's happening in her life. And so she's born at the end of Jacob's 14th year there in service. And notice again, here's the demonstration of God's compassion and his faithfulness. And he's fully aware, God is fully aware even today of all of our struggles and our needs. And so he's in his sovereignty, he's timing now when she's going to have a baby. And it's for God's purpose. This son that she's bearing, Joseph, is going to be fulfilling God's will. And so she has this deep relief, and she's like, finally, this is the joy that I have in my life. Look how Jacob blesses him in the end in Genesis 49. Joseph is a fruitful bow by a well. His branches run over the wall. The archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow remained in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the Almighty God of Jacob. And there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. There's another name for God there. The stone of Israel is one of the names that Jacob uses for the Lord. Notice here, the archer shot at him bitterly. These are his brothers, right? And this is Potiphar, and these are all these situations that he had in his life. And yet he says he remains strong. And then he goes on to say this, by the God of your father who will help you, and by the Almighty who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breasts and of the womb, and blessings of your father have excelled the blessings of my ancestors up to the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. And they shall be on the head of Joseph and on the crown of the head of him who was separate from his brothers. Remember, this was after all those years of Jacob thinking that he was dead. And here he is, the second in command in Egypt. And God put him in that position to save their lives. And here's how he delivered them and kept them from passing away and being wiped off the earth in a famine. And so again, we see God orchestrating. Was there years of suffering? Yes. You remember when the baker and the candlestick maker, they got out of prison, and he goes, tell Pharaoh I'm down here, And he goes, I will. They forgot. 2 years later, he's still down there. Pharaoh has a dream. Finally, God has to get him out by giving Pharaoh a dream. But he never loses his faith. There's not one negative thing spoken about Joseph. There's 2 people in the Bible, not including Jesus, where nothing negative is spoken about him. You know who they are? Daniel and Joseph. Not one negative thing spoken about him. So he had a life of faith, didn't he? He believed God, and God was using him. And so we see here, in fact, in First Chronicles, remember I was mentioning Reuben didn't get the double blessing. Notice what it says. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, he was indeed the firstborn, but his birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so that the genealogy is not listed according to the birthright, yet Judah prevailed over his brothers, and from him came a ruler, although the birthright was Joseph's. So even the writer of First Chronicles here is agreeing with Moses, where he didn't get the double blessing. The double portion went to Joseph through his 2 kids. And he didn't even get to be the one to bring the king in because he had his own issues. If we look over real quick in chapter 35, we'll see how Benjamin came to be. Now, it came to pass when, let's see, verse 16 of chapter 35, it's in your notes there. Then they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a small distance to go to Ephrath. Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now, notice verse 17. It came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, "Don't fear, you're going to have a son, this son also." And so it was as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin or Benjamin. So she passes away, giving birth to Benjamin, and this becomes the son of his old age. Notice the name she calls her here in her sorrow, son of my sorrow. And immediately, here's the only son that Jacob named was Benjamin. He changed his name to Benjamin, which means son of the south or son of my right hand. And so if we would have had another son, I would have named him Benjamin after I found out he was son of the south. So that's my last name, if you didn't know. But so he changed him to the son of my strength, or the son of my right hand. Rather than being associated with the death of your mother your whole life, you're going to be my son, the son of my right hand. And he loved him, didn't he? And he was the son of his old age, he would say later on. And then he prophesies over him in chapter 49, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. So the Benjamites were warriors. Who comes from the tribe of Benjamin? Saul. And Saul was a warrior, wasn't he? And these guys could fight. Yeah, Paul came. The other Saul also came from Benjamin. And they could fight. They were warriors, right? And remember, they actually almost got wiped out. It was Benjamin that was involved with that when that priest had the concubine and they wanted to, just like Sodom, they came to the door and they wanted to know them. He said, "Take my concubine," and they ended up having their way with her all night, and she died on the doorstep. He cut her up in 12 pieces and sent her out to every tribe of Israel, and they came to war. The other 11 tribes came to war against Benjamin, came to wipe him off. We're gonna get rid of a tribe today, is what they said. They were so outraged at the sin that had developed in the tribe of Benjamin. But here, Jacob is predicting that Benjamin would be successful in his fights, successful in his warfare, and he was. And so just looking at the story, notice God's using all of this tension. He's using all of the envy. He's being gracious and giving children in spite of, how they're treating each other. But what happens in their life? How does he use this in their lives? He brings Rachel to worship. He brings Leah to worship. He causes them as a family to trust. And this is how God uses every trial. He causes us to trust. And in every trial, we learn something about God we would not have learned had we not been in that trial. And this is how God works. When we go from faith to faith in our life, there's usually a trial between those two levels of faith. And if we cry enough, because God is a father, he'll take it away. He'll be like, "Okay, get me out of this, okay." But you're not going to grow until you let him take you through that trial. And when he takes you through that trial, then you grow. And you realize, wow, God's grace was present. Even in the thing I feared the most, he was present for me through his grace. You want to take just a few more minutes and see how this all plays out in the future? Here's Israel in the future now. Look at this. Here's why this is important. I get excited about this. Revelation chapter 7, verse 4 through 8. And I heard the number of those who were sealed. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Judah, 12,000 were sealed. Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh. I shortened this for our time tonight. Simeon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, which is Ephraim, and Benjamin, 12,000 were sealed. 144,000 in all. Who are these people in Revelation chapter 7? What? That's right. So you see this introduction to these 12 sons, which become 12 tribes, which are going to be 144,000 evangelists in the tribulation period, okay? And this is why, I want to bring this up tonight again, because God is not done with Israel. In fact, he uses 144,000 men, 12,000 from every tribe. What does this tell us? He knows where every tribe is, right? Even though they don't, okay? They don't have records anymore. All their records were destroyed in 70 AD, okay? So they can't even really raise up a true priesthood because there are no records of the Levites, okay? So when they raise up a priesthood, it's going to be, what's your name, Levites? Okay, you're going to be a priest. They don't have the records, okay? This is really important. God knows where every one of them is, though, because he's going to take 12,000 out of every one of these tribes, okay? And so here again, what do we see in the tribulation period? Israel front and center. And these are going to be young men, virgins, the Bible tells us, never been with a woman, and they're ready for God to seal them on the forehead, and they are going to live through the tribulation period as God's witnesses. Satan's going to try to kill them. The Antichrist is going to try to kill them, and he won't be able to. They've got God's seal on their forehead, and the dragon can't touch them. Powerful. What happens after this verse? A great revival in the tribulation period. The Gentiles get saved, billions of them, okay? And it's going to be an amazing thing to see from heaven, by the way. We're going to be in heaven. Look at this other picture of Israel. In Revelation 21, verse 12, the city wall, he's talking about New Jerusalem now. The city wall was broad and high with 12 gates guarded by 12 angels, and the names of the 12 tribes of Israel were written on the gates. What? This is forever, guys. Now, whose names are we going to see? These 12 sons. And there's going to be 3 gates on each side of a 4-sided city, and we're going to walk in and out of these gates with, hey, I'm going to go through the gate of Issachar today. I'm going to go through the gate of Judah today. They're going to be forever in front of our face. Again, here's a reason why we can say the church has not replaced Israel, okay? Because Israel's front and center for eternity. And it's going to be on the walls of the city of the New Jerusalem. In fact, we see, here's a graphic of it, and this is a neat graphic because you remember when they had to camp around the tabernacle? Look at this. Yeah, look at this. 3, 3, 3, 3. In the New Jerusalem, 3, 3, 3, 3. Same picture. Who's going to be in the New Jerusalem? The Lamb is the light. Okay? And so remember they were here. Now, this didn't lay out as a square, by the way, in the wilderness. Do you know what it laid out as? A cross. When you added all the things together, it was a cross. In the middle of the cross was the tabernacle, which represented Christ. In the New Jerusalem, it's going to be a square, but the 3 gates are going to be to the very presence of God himself, who's there. Now, this city already exists in heaven, and it's going to come down, okay? And God's presence is going to come down to earth. And this is just going to float in the sky. And the size of this city is going to be 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles by 1,500 miles. And it's going to be crazy. It's just going to be a giant cube in the sky. We're just going to go up and down and go wherever we want, going in and out of the gates of the children of Israel. So I show you this to show you, listen, God has a distinct plan for Israel. It's still in force. And we're not going to get away with it. But here's the other part of the city of New Jerusalem, is the foundation stones. Notice this. The wall of the city had 12 foundation stones, and on them were written the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The foundation is the apostles, the 12 apostles. The gates are the 12 tribes. This is the picture in front of us forever. The church and Israel. The church and Israel. The church and Israel. It's really an amazing picture. And we get to really see where we are in the beginning here. Again, a lot of these things are going to be fulfilled, and they're still in front of us, and we get to experience them. As we're reading here in Genesis chapter 30, we get to experience their full blessing, and we're going to go, oh man, that is cool. I just can't wait to see it. And we get to enjoy it, right? And God's gonna do it. And I bring that up for this specific purpose, is that we're in a time where there's a minimizing of the children of Israel. And God is not minimizing them. Okay, He's going to save them, and He's going to redeem them, and they're going to come to Christ, and we're going to see it from heaven. But only 1/3 gets saved. Only the remnant gets saved. So this means that 2/3 of the Jews are going to be killed. So this behooves us. We can't sit here and say, well, they're going to get saved in the tribulation period. No, not many of them. So we still need to share the gospel, bring them into the church, bring them to be part of the body of Christ, to where they're safe and they get to go in the rapture with us to heaven, right? And that's where we get to experience the Lord in His fullness. So it's exciting. But so again, this reminds us the tribulation is called Jacob's trouble. And that's where God's going to break Israel finally and bring them to Christ. And so keep that in mind as we see this dysfunctional family is going to finally be made whole. And God's going to be glorified. Amen. Any questions, any comments, any corrections, any heresy? Yeah. I would say so. Yeah, they're there. Yeah, again, in Ezekiel 36, God begins to bring the nation back. But He brings them back as unbelievers. Okay? They don't know the Lord. And then in 37, they're put back together as a nation, and then all of a sudden that's when He says, tell the Spirit to come, and He breathes on them and they actually become living beings. And that's when the Spirit of God comes into them. So this is still in front of us. They're going to get deceived by the Antichrist because they're going to think it's the Jesus Christ, their Messiah. And then they're going to be surprised when He wants them to worship Him, right? So what we're seeing in the world right now, all this is being set up. All of it's being set up right now. And the things Trump's doing is setting up systems that the Antichrist will use one day. And they're going to be the things that he takes over and controls. And all of these Gulf states over there that are, he's telling them, get into the Abraham Accords where you become a trading partner with Israel, but you have to acknowledge Israel can exist. And this is where Israel's going to finally be in a place where it's like, hey, we're finally at peace. That's what they want. They want peace. And they're going to say, hey, peace and safety, finally. And that's when, yeah. So when you look at it, the beast, who is the Antichrist, he comes out of the sea. Okay, he's a Gentile, most likely a Muslim. And then the false prophet comes out of the land. The land is Israel. So he's Jewish. So you have probably a Muslim Antichrist or European, but most likely Muslim. And then the false prophet is Jewish. And so both of these major religions that are in the world today get pacified. The Mahdi's here for the Muslims. The Messiah's here. He's the same person, and the false prophet is winning everybody over through deception. So it's really an amazing thing that we're going to see. We won't see that specifically. Why? Because we're not looking for the Antichrist. We're looking for Jesus Christ, right? So He's going to come and take us to heaven so He can get on with His agenda with Israel while we have the wedding supper of the Lamb in heaven, right? 7-year dinner. That's like a dream come true, isn't it? So let's pray. Father, we just come before You. We just praise You for tonight. We love You. Thank You for just letting us walk through the book of Genesis. We thank You for what it shows us. And Lord, how rich all of this is for us to be a part of, and also to see You in Your unbreakable covenants, and You're unwilling to break Your word, and You can't lie. You can't do any of that, Lord. We just thank You so much. Your character is so pure and holy and right that You can't deny who You are. It gives us hope here tonight as we continue to press ahead with You, that we believe our covenant with You is secure as well, because it's through the finished work of Christ and the promises of God. We love You. We praise You in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless you guys.